Okay, it is a little after 8:30, a little about 8:35, 8:36. Got a little late start here. Welcome to week number 4. Week 4. That just means that we're in the second half of this course, and that you just completed your week 3 assignments 2 days ago. I will be working on getting those graded by the end of the week, and I also want to remind you about a few things that I'm going to talk about in just a minute that I've noticed that some of you have not done in your written assignments, and I want to bring it back to you to make sure you get this again. So I'm just going to go ahead and get right into the lecture. All right, here we go. Showing you my home page. Okay, you should be able to see that, everybody, because I'm sharing it. So I know last week that many of you that looked at the recording did not see what I was talking about, but now I made sure double, because there's a new format they gave us and kind of threw me off a little bit. So anyway, what I want to talk about first is this point on the additional course information that has been discussed with you guys since week 1. The one I really want to talk about more than the first point is the second point. All written assignments should be in APA format. APA format that I've been looking for right off the bat is citations in the body. And I don't mean one citation or 2 citations. Citations to support your statements that you include in your papers. I read many papers and I see statements and I say, I know that you got that from somewhere and that you need to give credit for what it is there. So citations in the body, and then references at the end. Oftentimes, many of you will give references at the end and think that that does it. You will lose 5 points right off of the bat. That is in the rubric, and that is one of the grading procedures that is laid there. You will lose those points because I'm very serious about you doing APA because that's a college rule. And you will lose 1 point, it says here, for not providing a cover sheet. Now, some students say, well, you know what? I saw that on the course homepage, but I forgot that when I was doing my assignment. When we get to the assignment in a minute, I'm going to bring it back to you. But it's not so good for you if let's say you put a perfect paper together, and the paper is everything the way it's supposed to. You'll also lose points if you don't have the right amount of pages. If the assignment says a minimum of 3 pages or a minimum of 2 pages, then you need to make sure you satisfy that minimum because the cover sheet and the reference sheet does not count towards satisfying that. It's the content of the material. And so you do that. But let's assume that you did it. It says required 2 pages. You did 2 pages of really good material. And you had really good stuff. Because I read very fast. That came from me being a lawyer. So and I'm also a political science major, but English is my favorite subject, and not the speaking, but the reading and studying and writing of it. And so I'm very, very, very dogmatic about it, which is important. And so anyway, my point being is that I read through the paper, and I look at it, I'm very impressed by the material, the research, the writing, except at the end you have references. You list 4 references, 3 references, 2 references, 1 reference. But in the paper itself, you don't list any citations, giving credit for anything that you discovered. And so as a result of that, you're going to lose 5 points. And vice versa. If you put the citations in the body and don't put references on a separate reference page, at the end, you're going to lose 5 points for that. The reason why somebody said, well, why don't you get some credit? I said, because this is an area that you're either right or you're wrong on. It's like a true-false. If it's either true or it's false. It's not in the middle of the road. And so either you're going to satisfy the APA or not. You will get all the points. It is so, 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 so important. So important that I have resources to help you that are right here in the paper. I mean, on the cover page, which if you click on, you'll see it. Guides for APA. And then there's a nice little link over there where my mouse is, and you can do that. But it is very, 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 very important. So let's say you don't have a cover sheet and you don't have APA. So if you had 25 points, you get 19 points, and your grade drops. So I'm saying do yourself a favor and follow that very carefully. I can discern that what students do is that they say, oh, yeah, I got it covered. No, you got to follow the steps and procedures. It is so important that you got to do this. This is for integrity basis, but this is also for purposes of future transition into the real world. You've got to get into the habit. Got to get. I even now, when I write something, I'll write a citation in the body and a reference at the end from the source that I used to get the citation. When I was in school, we did footnotes. I had to do something even more involved with footnotes. But anyway, that's just the point. The point of the matter is you gotta do that. And I'm spending time in every one of my lectures that I do this week, and I'm doing 3 this week, and then next week I'm doing 5 again. But the point of the matter is this: you gotta get this, because it could be the difference in an A and a B. All right. So now, having said that, not to mention the Grammarly, you guys are doing pretty good. Most of you, in your papers you write, I run them through Grammarly, check the plagiarism. Most of you are good. Few of you aren't. If you aren't, the way you're not running your papers through Grammarly in your side and checking the plagiarism box. But you got to make sure you check the plagiarism box. And when you turn your papers, I don't want to see your notes in the column that you did Grammarly. I've seen that in 1 or 2 students' papers. I don't want to see that. I want to see the clean paper. So then, again, this reminds you about our lectures. We are at week 4, so we have 2 more to go. And then, again, you will notice at the bottom, I post your lectures in here. I don't know why this didn't turn into a hyperlink, but it still doesn't matter. It's still there and can be seen. But the point of the matter is every week I will have them here, and then I also email them to you. So let's take a look at week 4 announcements. Week 4 announcement in crime against government and public order. We're going to talk about that a little bit. So you were supposed to read chapter 8 of the textbook, and then take a look at the activities: domestic terrorism, obstruction of justice, resisting arrest, fleeing police, disorderly conduct, and free speech. And then take a look at the key terms for practice. You know, we already been going over that. Again, I'm not going to go over those a whole lot, but I show you a few of those with you in the class. And then the quiz, which you're not graded for, but it helps you to prepare for the actual quiz that comes up as well. So your assignments for this week that are written, other than your reading up here, is your discussion post, obstruction of justice. The initial post is due tonight by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. Then your reply post Saturday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And you know what I'm looking for because you've seen my grading process as to I'll let you know what I like. I'll let you know what I don't like. I'll let you know why you lost points. I'll let you know if you had a good post. Very simply, I'll just tell you, you know, good content, information, good details. I'm not going to elaborate on it because we use a rubric. And then, so your written assignment is fleeing or eluding police. Then we're going to talk about the specifics in just a minute. And then complete the mid-quarter survey. You know what my motto is: adversity is springboard success is all about. So now let's take a look at the course calendar. Course calendar. And here we are, down here at the bottom, 27th, your reading assignment. And again, as you click on that, it tells you exactly what I just went over with you a few minutes ago. Then it tells you your initial post, the title of that, Obstruction of Justice. Your reply post. Then it tells you your written assignment, which you're going to find more details. And it tells you, if you look at this, look at the rubric and the assignment. Now, if you recall, at the very beginning of the course, I shared with you on the course homepage, again, how important the rubrics are. Use the rubric as a checklist to make sure that you satisfy the requirement. All sections of the rubric, which we're going to go to in just a minute. So that's our course calendar. I'm going to close that down. And then I'm going to go to Module 4, which is the actual module. And then I'm going to start out by going over the assignments. Again, your discussion post talks about Terry versus Ohio and the stop. I looked at a few of your comments in there, and you have to understand certain things about that, and you want to apply that. Terry versus Ohio is known in the vernacular of the legal business as the stop and frisk case. Stop and frisk case. And when you're dealing with a Terry stop, it is brief. It involves a pat down. It is not based upon probable cause. Therefore, the person is not under arrest at that point. But you pat them down for the safety of the officer. If you feel bulkiness, you can ask the person to take out what they have in their pockets. If, though, you feel that the bulkiness is a gun, now you have probable cause, and then you can place the person under arrest and seize the item. Before that, a Terry stop is very, 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 very brief. And that's all I'm going to say about that. You go ahead and you can read it, and it gives you the details to help you. Okay? Some of you already have already submitted them, but the point of the matter is you need to understand and know that. So now for your reply post. Now for your written assignment, because you'll notice down here, all you have is a survey, which is not an assignment, but we ask you to do it, the live lecture, which you're here right now. So we tell you what to do. This is a two-part assignment. You guys are well familiar with the two-part assignments. It involves a written portion, and it involves a flyer. You guys know about that because you had to do that. And so it tells you what you want to do, and it gives you some guidance in terms of helping you to get that done. All right? So for part one, you're going to use this scenario. Okay? And then to complete this, review this right here. Click on that. And this case right here that's given. Okay? And so you want to use that as a basis for answering these questions. And remember, here we go, right here. When you open it up, it's going to say it's due the 2nd, which is Sunday. It's going to say for 40 points. Now, it explains to the same thing here. It's a two-part assignment, and it's going to be broken down in the rubric, as you should be familiar with right now. There we go. Part one, examine the type of crimes committed. And you're going to have to provide this information. Notice the 2-page minimum requirement. Remember what I said earlier. Your rubric tells you exactly how you can get 15 points. You got to do all of these things in here. Now, in order then, you're going to make sure that you have paragraphs. Don't write me long paragraphs. Paragraphs should be an average of 5, maybe 6 sentences, 7. I've had papers given to me sometimes that have, the whole paper is one paragraph. It just keeps going on, and that's not formatted properly. And so the key thing is you want to satisfy that to get your 5 points. And then finally, regarding the this is the part 1. Part 2 is the flyer. Okay, so part 1 is this and this, all the way 1, 2, 3. This is what you mess up on. APA with a title page, I told you that. Reference page, proper spacing paragraph, all sources cited as in-text citation in the body of the paper. I say that. I just got through talking about that. And you want to make sure that you have your reference page. And do not use unreliable sources such as Wikipedia. Nobody in this class used Wikipedia. Another class they used Wikipedia. And as soon as that, they lost 5 points. So you'll lose 5 points in here if you don't. APA is your big issue in this. That's your 5 points. And so it's very, very, very important, and it's right there. And if you add those all points up, those points total, it's going to be 40. Okay? So you got 15, 20, 25 plus 15 is 40. That's how you get all your points. Okay? So your flyer, 1-page requirement, and it tells you what you want to include in your flyer. Okay? So that's all I want to say about that. But that's where you got to make sure. Again, here's the deal. Look at this. You can do, go back again, you can do everything right. This right, this right, this right. But you're going to end up with a 40. I'm sorry, with a 35. Because you're going to mess up with APA. You don't have 2 pages long, then you're going to end up losing, depending on how short the paper is, anywhere from 3 to 5 points. If you don't have citations throughout the body of the paper, you're going to lose some points, because the whole idea of citations is that citations provide information about the details. All sources are properly cited. That means if you throw 1 citation in there for 2 pages, you're going to get dinged for that, because of the fact that that means you wrote a paper that's not your information entirely, because you're not the expert, but you're going to not give credit for the information from the source that you got that information from, and you're going to lose points for that. So it's important. I've seen students, and I could tell, oh, they just threw in a citation so they won't get hit with the APA. Okay, you won't get hit with the APA, but you will get hit with loss of points for failure to provide citations throughout the body of the paper. I put that comment in, and it makes sense to you, to me, because that means then you didn't adequately prepare this paper with all the details. And so that's how it works. And so that's how you get your maximum grade. Okay? So I've covered the requirements again, harping on APA, but it's very, 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 very important that you get that. Let me get that out of there. That's what I was looking at. Okay. So now, having said all of that, I'm going to go back to the assignment. And so you got everything here. All right. So now I want to go back to the lesson page. And the lesson content is where we spend our time from here. So we're going to talk about crimes against the government and public order, laws pertaining to obstruction of justice, dealing with resisting arrest and fleeing, and when free speech is there and when it turns into disorderly conduct. Again, you're reading Chapter 8. We're going to talk about domestic terrorism, obstruction of justice, resisting arrest, fleeing police, disorderly conduct, and free speech. We're going to just touch on each of these sections. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on them because we roughly have about 35 more minutes left before completed. But I do remind you, practice quiz and free speech or disorderly conduct, you want to do that practice there and the key terms that will help you when you do come to your exams. So domestic terrorism. Well, what that means basically is what it means. When you say domestic, we're talking about within the United States itself. So domestic terrorism is pretty much the FBI's area, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and they look at and see what is happening. Now, domestic terrorism can be carried out by an international organization, but the place that I'm talking about it happening is within the United States, or any, is Hawaii a state in the United States? Yes, it's the 50th state. Is domestic terrorism considered in Puerto Rico? Yes, because it's a province of the United States, and so those places. So anyway, the point of the matter is that we are at a state in time now which you have come to learn since September the 11th, when we had the World Trade Center bombing, when the World Trade Center collapsed in New York based upon two planes one striking each tower and bringing it down to the ground. And so as a result, many people were killed, and it was one of the biggest terroristic activities in the United States. Another big one that came before that was the Oklahoma City bombing that took place when, and by the way, individuals who are involved in terrorism can be United States citizens, as in the case of the Oklahoma bombing, or either can be foreign individuals or terrorist groups such as ISIS or other groups that are included in terrorism. But the point of the matter is that the violence is committed, and the design of this activity is to get the attention of the government, and it is against the government, though it does result in killing mass numbers, great numbers of people. Also, we have terrorism when you get to the point of dealing with, like what happened in Vegas, the Las Vegas shooting at the Mandalay Hotel. We're talking about, again, there was one that happened in, I'm drawing a blank on the city, for the San Bernardino. It might have been San Bernardino, but it was in California. And the point of the matter is that there are organizations that claim that they are responsible for it. Just because they claim it does not necessarily mean that they did it. But it doesn't really matter, because we're at a point now where you cannot go to any public event that's on a high level. Like what happened at the Mandalay, there was a music fest. That same individual had targeted in Chicago here every year. We have Lollapalooza, which is also a large musical festival that takes place in the park on in downtown. And this guy had planned on getting a hotel room in Chicago on Michigan Avenue, high up, facing that direction, and then shooting, and what we did in Vegas there as well. So we're talking about sniper activity. We're also talking about terrorism that takes place in the form of these school shootings. These are also, but there's not organizations, individuals as well. And so when you get into those types of activities, the state and the federal groups usually work together in those school shootings and those kind of situations. But again, it can be carried out for even some of the, there are people who object to the environment. There are people who have all kinds of reasons why they commit these events. And it says here that a state-sponsored terrorism, which is terroristic act on or by a state government. So when another government, I'm not talking about these terrorist groups attack, like for example, Pearl Harbor was the Japanese and Japan, and that was terrorism, but that was what we call state-sponsored terrorism because it was a state government, not like in Illinois when you say state, but we're talking about a government entity or foreign entity. So we are at a time now where almost every event that you go to, you have to go through metal detectors. You can't bring in a lot of picnic baskets. You can't bring in water jugs. I know we were in Texas a week or so ago, and on the plane going on, there were people who had water bottles that they had before they went through the TSA check. They said you can't take those liquids on. Even on your carry-ons, you couldn't carry certain lotions and certain perfumes and perfume bottles. You had to put those in your check. But the point of the matter is that because what happened is people got on the planes and they would use them for weapons. And if you were on a plane and you did something to even attack one person, it's still considered as terrorism because it could adversely affect the lives of other people who are on the plane as well. So dealing with the difference, international terrorism is these bullet points, of course, dangerous to life, outside of the United States or foreign organization, a violation of the laws of the United States or any state if committed within the United States, and that is intended to intimidate the population, the civilians, because they were victims, but that to influence the government itself to do something, to intimidate or force the government to do something, affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. Those are the kinds of things that we're talking about. When our ambassadors or individuals are in foreign countries and they are kidnapped, when an individual, I forgot the guy's name who actually died, he was arrested, so they said, for taking a picture or something. And he ended up being incarcerated, and then he ended up being released to the federal government and then brought back home, and he died. Well, that was, I think, it was in North Korea. I think that was involved in that. But anyway, the point of the matter is that anything that results in a citizen of the United States, even if you're on vacation or you're over there, and one of these things occur. So international terrorism takes place. The attacks that happened during 9/11 is an example because it was carried out on U.S. soil by a foreign group. That's what I said a few minutes ago. So that's a description of international terrorism. Domestic terrorism, on the other hand, as I already said to you, it takes place within the United States. And it can be from people in the United States or not. Some examples here, I mentioned a few. One of them is in here already, the Oklahoma City bombing in the second paragraph, where Timothy McVeigh and I forget the other guy's name, but there were two, Terry Hake, I think it. No, maybe I make them mixed up with something else. But anyway, Timothy McVeigh, and it says they targeted the Oklahoma City. It was a state building, a federal building, and it was motivated by an avenge for handling an early incident at Ruby Ridge in Naples, Idaho, where a federal agent was killed along with a 14-year-old. And this guy here thought that the incident was not handled by the government and that the death of the 14-year-old was unnecessary. So what does he do? He sets a bombing that kills 168 people and more than 600 women and children. So what he did was he killed more children than the incident at Ruby Ridge. But that's an example. The terrorism is committed like an Olympic Park bomber, Eric Rudolph, basically dealing with anti-abortion clinics, resulted in the death of others. The bombing that took place at the Boston Marathon, that's another example of those kinds of things. Now, again, the key with domestic terrorism is where it takes place, not who is doing it, okay? So who handles that? Well, you deal with the first, the local people, the first responders respond to any crime that takes place. But it actually results in the federal government being brought in, so it's not just a state violation, it's a federal violation. So all those agencies work together in terms of investigating the crime that takes place, okay? For example, in the Oklahoma City, a state trooper stopped McVeigh for a minor issue after he committed the act, and then arrested him. And then Eric Rudolph was arrested by a patrol officer who was checking and found him lurking in the area. So I'm saying is that the actions that they do, the state or local authorities help to investigate it there. But you're dealing with the FBI, you're dealing with the DEA, and now we have the Homeland Security, which came about and was created as a result of what happened September the 11th, 2001. We didn't have Homeland Security prior to that. It was a totally new agency that was created, and it's pretty much for what it says, to address the overall umbrella of dealing with domestic terrorism, which is now prevalent in society now. And so these are just a few of the points. So it gets the idea across to you what we're talking about when we talk about domestic and international terrorism. So unfortunately, it's a different time now. I remember a time when I used to fly, and there's a lot more you could carry on. I remember going to baseball games and carrying glass in the picnic basket. But now you actually go through metal detectors now, and because of that. But also, you're dealing with domestic terrorism at schools now. You have them as well. The next place that I'm going to end up seeing them is, and I've already said this before years ago, before it even came about at schools, is churches. Our courthouses, without saying, it used to be in the civil courthouses that they didn't have that. But in our jurisdiction here in Cook County particularly, and even in Will County and other counties I've been in, is that it doesn't matter what kind of case you still go through, because there's been terrorism where judges and lawyers have been killed by individuals bringing in weapons. And in fact, there's a rule that even the judges cannot bring in weapons in the court building itself. It's a violation of the law. The key thing is that metal detectors are here, and we're not paranoid. We're now reached in a stage where we have to be very, very, very protective. Super Bowl, any place where large groups of people gather, and particularly big events, big concerts, as I said, and World Series, hockey, all these places, you go through that, and that's because of domestic terrorism that has been taking place. So, obstruction of justice. So what does it mean? Obstruction means covering up, hiding, or interfering. Okay, so it's not just not telling the truth. That's not it. It also includes misleading police or withholding information that prevents one from conducting a criminal investigation. And it can happen anywhere. It can happen in proceedings in court. It can, because you're under oath. And actually, when you commit perjury, when you're lying under oath, you raise your right hand and do solemnly tell the whole truth. And you know what I really really hate? And I'm looking at the picture here, and you can see it here. This is this young lady. She's got her right hand up, and she has her left hand what appears to be a Bible. But our jurisdiction, I know in Cook County, they stopped doing that. They don't do that anymore because it was ridiculous. People would get and they'd put their left hand on the Bible, which is supposed to be which is the book of truth, and says, "I do solemnly swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God," and proceed to not just misrepresent, but out and out lie. So once you take an oath to tell something, and this happens whether you're in a in a committee, you can be in an administrative hearing, you could be before Congress or a state legislative body, and they're conducting an investigation. When you willfully lie after taking an oath or affirms, some people don't take oaths. I don't do oaths. I affirm because I don't swear. So I affirm to tell the whole truth. But during a court proceeding, and again, this can happen in a Senate hearing or something like that. If you have paid close attention, also if you lied to investigators and so forth, you've noticed that many people who are indicted, like some of the people who have so far been indicted and charged with crimes in the case like Paul Manafort, and I can't think of the other guy's name who's out of Chicago, but many more to come. The thing that gets you in trouble is not is lying under oath, because you're obstructing justice, and that's the crime, and that could send you to jail for many years. Let's say, for example, if you tell the truth, and you know, okay, you might get some kind of issue, but you'll get more time. It's a more serious offense when you actually find yourself committing perjury. So it's like a crime upon a crime, okay? So that's one way of doing obstruction of justice. Here's the other way. In the streets of the United States of America, if you are deliberately misleading the police, so if a person asks you, if the police officer asks you your name and you give some other name, you actually are obstructing justice, whether you know it or not, because you're misleading the police in doing their job. Now, it says here, people are not required to talk to the police when questioned. You don't have to talk. The law in the Fifth Amendment provides the ability to remain silent. You heard this, the infamous Miranda case. That is the first statement. You have a right to remain silent. It means what it says. That also means, with the Fifth Amendment, that in a trial, you don't have to take the witness stand if you're a defendant to testify, because the burden is on the prosecution to prove that you're guilty. So you don't have to help them. Now, I'm not saying that, and I did it as a lawyer. Many times I decided that my client, for whatever reasons, that I won't go into details, but there are a number of reasons why I may decide not to put my client on the stand. Well, that's a frequent tactic that defense lawyers use. The reason is because of the fact that it's not in the best interest of defending my client. But here's what I'm going to say, is that technically a conclusion cannot be or should not be drawn that because my client didn't take the stand that he's hiding something. Now, I said technically, but on the practical level, you can understand that the jurors, and even the judges subconsciously, but jurors especially, they feel like, they're not supposed to use that against you, but they're the triers of fact. And so anyway, you don't have to do that. It says, however, if a person chooses to answer the questions, you got to tell the truth. You got to be honest. Otherwise, then you're going to be not charged with perjury because you're not under oath while you're in the streets, but you're going to be charged with obstructing justice. If you try to hide somebody out and the police are looking for them, you're lying again. Let me give you an example here that's right here. Kansas state statute, interference with law enforcement prohibits obstructing states that interfere or obstruct falsely reporting to a law enforcement officer, agency, or state investigating agency that a particular person has committed a crime, knowing that information is false. In other words, you're not telling the truth and you know it. That the law enforcement officer has a law enforcement officer has committed a crime or committed misconduct in the performance of their duties, and then false reports are prepared. And I've seen that happen. But now with the advent of video, you know, there's a whole lot of people going down for the reports that say one thing and another. So police officers get caught up in it as well because that's obstructing justice. Any information, knowing that such is false, to influence, impede, or obstruct the investigation is also considered as obstruction of justice. Any information concerning the death, disappearance, or potential death or disappearance of a child under the age of 13, knowing that such information is false. You can be sure that the age issue is an issue, but that reporting someone like concealing a body. Do you not know you could be charged with killing a person and then burying them in a shallow grave, so you're charged with murder and obstruction of justice as well. But that's the way it operates. Concealing, destroying, or materially altering evidence with the intent to hinder the apprehension. Let me give you an example of that. People will sometimes commit a crime and then they will burn the body. They will mutilate the body and spread the remains in a forest preserve or park. We had one of those situations that happened here in an investigation several years ago where a boyfriend did that, and he was charged not with murder but with manslaughter, and then he was charged with obstruction of justice as well for concealing the body because the body wasn't found. So we always say that in the criminal business that you need a corpus delicti or a body to be able to prove a crime, but there is a way to do that without that. But the point of the matter is just because you conceal the body does not necessarily mean you will not be charged or prosecuted for it, and you won't show them. It's like, for example, right now, nobody knows where the whereabouts is of Stacy Peterson, but her ex-husband is in jail not because of her disappearance, but he's in trouble because he was prosecuted for killing another wife, and then he was further prosecuted for setting up a contract while he was incarcerated to attempt to kill the prosecutor. Well, at this point, they don't have enough evidence to do it. They haven't found the body, and she's still considered as a missing person. But almost everybody has strong speculation that he knows where the person is. He said she ran off, but no one's seen her. She hasn't been seen. And so anyway, the bottom line is that he's already serving enough time that he'll never get out. But should they discover the body and find it, then, you know. And he actually could help them with all the time that he has now, but he doesn't care. He's gotten all this time now for the crimes that he's committed, So he doesn't even care if the crime is solved or not. So he's being a jerk about the whole thing. But knowingly obstructing, resisting, or opposing any person authorized by law to serve you with a summons or subpoena, who's attempting to issue a warrant or the discharge of official duty, that's obstruction of justice as well. And then there's an article below, which we're not going to go into, but you can take time to read that as well. So now, and then review the Terry case. And the question that I said is that, for example, in contrast, in Wisconsin, statute says temporary questioning without arrest provides police with the authority to stop, temporarily, did you hear the word temporarily detain? Did it say arrest? And demand the name of a person who is suspected of being involved in criminal activity. It's based on, however, no specific provision exists within the statute that compels the people to identify themselves. They can remain silent. Did you hear me? I said it earlier. And there is no legal ramifications for failing to identify yourself. You don't have to do anything. If you're arrested in that case, the officer is frustrated, the officer is going to find a problem with that case. Failing to identify can be a factor that the police can consider, but merely refusing to identify yourself is not prohibited within the statute, like it is in Ohio. Now, again, the Terry stop was a very interesting situation. So, talking about Wisconsin, therefore, Wisconsin police must use more investigative powers for individuals who refuse to identify themselves, such as consulting, booking photos, looking for other methods and things of that nature. So the Wisconsin law, it says, does allow police to conduct an exterior pat-down, which is where the Terry search comes in there, and a minimum intrusion to remove a wallet on a person that may help. Now, that's very interesting. In Wisconsin, you can do that. I don't think you can do that here in my state, Illinois, is go in somebody's pocket for their wallet. Because then you're going beyond the reach. And so it depends on where your jurisdiction is, where you have that issue. But again, you know what's going to happen eventually with a case like that? It's going to go up, and they're going to challenge Terry again with a case like from Wisconsin. So if someone finally brought a case up that ultimately ends up in the Supreme Court, they can deal with it from that perspective as well. Individuals can comply with so-called failure to ID laws by either providing identification or saying that their name is. Not identifying one else is similar to obstructing, but the mere act of failing it itself is not a criminal violation. And not all states have failure to identify laws, and then it tells you that. So once again, usually when there are states that have varying laws, what it finally takes is something to reach the Supreme Court so that they can come up with a law that goes across the jurisdiction and settles it so that we have uniformity. Or the justices to describe why that person in that instance might and may not necessarily apply it uniformly. But the ideal thing is for the Supreme Court to give some uniformity for all jurisdictions. Be aware that under criminal law, that states are allowed to write their own codes. However, if they conflict with a constitutional right, then in that case, they're going to fall. And so the argument in these cases, like, for example, it's the Fourth Amendment search and seizure issue that would be up for argument in, like it was in Terry, and it would be like that in if a case like Wisconsin came up. So, all right. So we got a few more to go. We are almost out of time here. But resisting arrest. Well, that means very simply that if a person, you're under arrest, And to ensure that the arrest is successful, you must first of all know that you're under arrest. Now, how do we know that a person is placed under arrest? Sometimes it's the words or the action of a law enforcement officer and bringing the person under control. Now, let me say this. If you are placed under arrest, the required standard is not reasonable suspicion as it is in the Terry stop. It is probable cause, which is a higher standard, and there must be more than just a belief or feeling, a hunch. Not going to happen. So if the officer does arrest you, and we always tell people the best practice is not to try to exercise your rights with police by speaking out, or if they're going to place you in cuffs, by kicking, fighting, and stuff like that. That's when you get in trouble. But what you do, if they're wrongfully doing it, let your lawyers clear this out in a court of law. Okay, that's the best practice that we can advise you. Now, explicit custody is very clear and leaves little room for error or misrepresentation. For example, when an officer says somebody, okay, you're under arrest. There it is. So you don't have to wonder. Now, be aware of the under arrest statement is that you are told to place your hand behind your back and place in handcuffs. Then you're clearly under arrest. Now, when you are under arrest, statements that are made, if you just blurt them out, you don't want to do that. But if they are going to ask you questions, what must they do? What must they do?
Mirandize you.
There you go. They must Mirandize you. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you, and you have a right to an attorney, and so forth and so on. Usually they have a pre-printed card. That's the practice that most departments are using. So that's that. Now, here's implicit custody. Is not as clear, but here's the deal. If a reasonable individual would believe that at that time that they are not free to go, that is the key element. If you are not free to go, then you are under arrest. So if a police officer is asking you a question and you don't want to answer it, and they say, you ask them, can I go? And they say no. As soon as they say that, that means that it's implicit custody and you are in custody. Okay? So what you want to do is not resist because you didn't hear that. So what's the thing to know, and I always teach my law enforcement people, is that before you Mirandize a person, you don't have to say you're under arrest. But if you deprive them of their liberty to go, then in that case, then that point in time, you need to Mirandize them. Okay? And they give some facts and circumstances here. For example, if a detective has been invited inside the home of a suspect to speak with him, and they spoke to him at the table, at the kitchen table. This is not an arrest, okay? This is not custodial. However, though, if the officer brought 4 uniformed officers with him, and they surrounded the individual, and then the perception was that the reason they surrounded him is to deprive him of freedom, this restriction is considered as an arrest. Then they must Mirandize him. So that's a warning, as in this last sentence. I've said it already, and I'll say it again. Law enforcement or police officers are constantly reminded of whether or not a person is under arrest, either implicitly or explicitly. And that's the key thing here. So that's it. So resisting can take such as assaultive behavior, punching or kicking, or spitting or throwing something at somebody, and those kind of situations. And so they talk about what the various states describe as an offense. And usually it's a Class A misdemeanor, but it is a crime, okay? We're going to go here quickly with fleeing police. It means very simply, it means that if you run away from or anything like that. Now, oftentimes it happens in vehicles, but it happens on foot as well. And so fleeing includes running away from on foot or in a vehicle. One is more dangerous than the other. Which one do you think is the most dangerous?
In a vehicle?
Yeah, and the reason being is because you're going to go at high speed. It's going to be high speed, and you're going to possibly hurt people. Now, the infamous OJ fleeing was not like that. He was driving at regular speed, but he was still fleeing. Anyway, the point of the matter is that injuries can happen doing foot chases, but the vehicle chase is the one that creates most of the injuries, and police officers and other individuals that are innocently driving can end up. And there are policies that departments have for car chases. So it's important that that's kept in mind. So we talk about vehicle pursuit, and it depends because you're not having regard for the individuals during the pursuit. The elements the police have to consider whether or not what time of day it is. Certain times of day is more traffic, pedestrian, the weather condition, the road, the speed, and then the drivers or the officer. You're in the academy. You're taught to be able to maneuver, but most agencies have something like the sample pursuit policy, which I won't click on, and you can take a look at that on your own. Okay. So now let's talk about force to stop techniques. So the police can stop you by some of them times they ramming the motorist, using a full roadblock, and there's some other things I'm going to talk about in a second. But you got to be very careful in terms of all of these situations, not to create harm to someone. Now, let's say if you are in one of those situations and an officer is killed, you will probably be charged with, if it's a felony that you committed, is that you could be charged with what we call felony murder, because someone is killed in an instance like that. Let's say you commit a burglary and you're trying to get away, and an officer is killed, not by shot or something, but they're killed in the process of trying to apprehend you. So a fleeing suspect of a violent felony takes their speed to 45, so that's 15 over, an attempt. But the suspect stops at all lights, uses turn signals, and then these driving behaviors alone are not overtly dangerous, and ramming wouldn't be justified. Okay, the same suspect traveling at 90, it would change that scenario because of their high rate of speed. So you'd have to look at this Scott versus Harris case to get a good example of what I'm talking about. But you get the idea. Now, there are techniques that officers have that they teach them as to how to do it, and these are what we call PITs and pursuit intervention techniques. And I'm not going to go over them, but you can see how you hit the vehicle, come alongside it, stuff like that. The point of the matter is that you don't want to create a dangerous situation to anybody, pedestrian or anything. Just next, I'll just show you this one. Stop sticks. These are well known. You know about those, okay? Uh, if you, for example, if you're trying to get out of a parking lot without paying, and they have those, you know what'll happen if you go over those, you get flat tires, you know. But then it slows you down. You can, riding on rims is not as fast, so you use stop sticks. uh, Partial roadblocks. But you know, people go through those. I've been, uh, as a law enforcement officer, part of roadblocks. But we always have something to back us up other than that, just us, our bodies. Because if a car is coming at me high speed, I'm not standing in front of it. This is not Matador. I'm not trying to do El Toro, okay? I'm getting out of the way. Boxing in, this is again showing you earlier where there are four cars around it, and then that kind of thing. So, you know, those are just some of the techniques there that are involved. Disorderly conduct and free speech. This is the last thing I'm going to do. You have a First Amendment right to free speech, and I remind people of that constantly. However, there is a balance between your First Amendment right and creating disorder. For example, not that the person might not like what you're saying, because, for example, I've seen the Ku Klux Klan go march through a Jewish community, the Nazis, through a Jewish community. So their First Amendment speech is protected. But the intention of the First Amendment is to promote it, an exchange of ideas, but to do so in a peaceful and orderly fashion. Now, it says here, any forms of speech that inflame, is designed to inflame, or likely physical confrontation, is considered what we call fighting words. That's what the law says. So that's taken from a case, actually, U.S. Supreme Court case. And so disorderly conduct prohibits the use of obscenities directed at a person. It can be said, excuse me, it can be said, but not directed at a person. If you're just saying, you know, oh, out loud, blank the pigs or so forth, but you're not talking directly to somebody. You don't have, like this lady got a megaphone in this man's face. I don't know what she's saying. But anyway, obscenity, profanity, language likely to cause a breach of peace. And then the state of Idaho statute kind of lays it out. But that's kind of like the way it works. So you have to be mindful of the fact that policemen always are called whenever there are situations of disorder. However, though, oftentimes they're to protect everybody, the people who are protesting, as well as the people who disagree with them. So if the peaceful protest becomes a riot, and a riot is defined as a tumultuous disturbance of the peace by 3 or more persons. That's what Black's Law Dictionary says. Be aware that some jurisdictions have 2 or more assembling together of their own authority, and their intention is to create a bad situation. And often it results in loss of property, physical harm, and sometimes death. As you recall, I think it was South Carolina or someplace or another, where someone drove a car into the crowd and killed a young lady. You know what I'm talking about? You familiar with that one?
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, those are the kind of situations where, you know, but riots, you know, out of control. And so this is a 35-minute video. If you have time, go back and look at it. I'm not going to obviously go through that now with you. And then there are some real-life examples of difference between free speech and disorderly conduct. I would say that, I would say this to you, that you almost not know when it's not a riot, okay? So anyway, that's this. So now, your key terms, I'm not going to go over them, but I'm just going to remind you again, just how you can go through, and you can go use the flashcards. Then, you know, you might have to run Adobe Flash, which I don't know why, because I just updated it. You know, and then here's just one. We're just going to do this one. Occurs when a person has willfully been untruthfully after taking oath or affirmation during a court proceeding. What is that? What do we call that? What's the word?
I forgot the word.
Starts with a P. Ends in a Y.
It's coming. Drawing a blank.
Okay, let's go back. You're going to say, oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
I know you were. So anyway, yeah, perjury. Perjured. You perjured yourself. Perjury. You liar. And you say, some people say lying, but yeah, but the legal term we're looking for is perjury. I'm going to do one more because I like these. Deliberately misleading police or withholding information that prevents government from effectively and efficiently investigating criminal matters. This is a longer one.
Obstruction of justice.
You got it? Yay! So those are the things, you know. So yeah, you said it real slow, like, but that was like question and answer. Yes, no, you were right. So anyway, use these and use those for studying tools and to help you. I think you have fun when you sit down and you do those, and you say, "Oh man," you know. So it's like playing a word game, but you're playing by yourself, and you actually what you're doing is studying at the same time. So you're having fun and learning. So free speech and disorderly conduct, and then you'll learn the difference between the two. I'm not going to get into details on that. And then your practice quiz as well. So that's it. We're gone a little over, but I'm going to give you what I want you to deal with for this week. And here it is. Domestic terrorism. That's what I'm looking for. I'm going to put it just like that. You give me that, that's what I'm looking for. Domestic terrorism. You got it? You got it? Did you get it? I guess so. I will know. So, okay, you got it. All right, so I'm going to say good night, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen and terminate the meeting. So, see you next week. All right.